carried on voices. There are no petitions and there is no public input. Local board input, we may have, no local board input at this stage for the open meeting. Extraordinary items, I have received no notification of none. So we will move now to item 8, which is the long-term lease of Bledisloe House, Te Whaurau o Hauratu. And I welcome to present this item Ross Cheenside, and I know that we've also got Rod Aitken, Head of Corporate Property, if needed. So Ross, are you there?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, please.
Yeah. Kia ora, councillors, IMSB members. The purpose of this report is to implement decisions that were made as part of the 10-year budget. In the recovery budget, we consulted on a long-term lease for Bledisloe House, which is now surplus to Council's requirements. In December last year, the Finance and Performance Committee made the decision to consult. In making that decision, options were considered as to the future use of Bledisloe building, with the preferred option, which was consulted on, was to enter into a long-term lease with the same developer as who's developing over the Aotea station. MRCB has now been confirmed as that party for the overstation development. So following the consultation and consideration of feedback, the 10-year budget provides for this long-term lease, and today we're just seeking approval to actually then implement that. And by implementing that, I mean is to enter into exclusive negotiations with MRCB to create an integrated development which aligns with the Aotea Quarter framework. And if agreement cannot be reached with MRCB, then to look at an open market process. MRCB were selected following an open market process which was recently concluded, and that's got the greatest chance of actually being able to integrate these two public realm assets to give the best outcome for Auckland. Yeah, kia ora.
Thank you for that, Ross. Any questions for Ross? This is a unanimous decision to do this.
I've got a few questions.
Right, remember, Wayne, you don't call out if you're on the sidebar, but I'll open to you for questions. Thank you.
All right, so in respect of valuation, I appreciate it's a long-term lease, but have we had any valuation done of what the range might be?
Through the chair, yes, but this item is in an open meeting, so I would rather not say any more. There's been some indicative valuation work done, but it's not concluded.
Okay. The next question that I've got is around C3. I'm looking at the recommendation where we are approving the lease, but the final terms and conditions under C3 are approved by the Iki Panuku board. And the question I've got is in the context of the sale of the Civic Administration building, which has got some parallels, and because there wasn't any report back to Auckland Council, because there wasn't any check and balance, I'd suggest that there were significant things that occurred in terms of the amount of money that we received, and also issues that went to heritage, possibly other things that it would have been desirable for the council to have some oversight over. So my question is, would there be any problem adding to that C3 the words and Auckland Council, so that the final terms of conditions aren't just delegated to Iki Panuku, but they come back to Auckland Council as well?
So through the chair, council has determined to have a CCO, which is an expert in these matters, in Iki Panuku. They have successfully concluded the recent negotiations with MRCB, and we believe they're the best placed party to be able to conclude those negotiations successfully on behalf of council. One of the things is as we take commercial opportunities to the marketplace, is to be able to give the market confidence that council is committed to actually, implementing a sale, or in this case, a long-term lease. So actually being very clear that political approval is in place before that starts is very important, other than getting to the end where actually, people have invested a lot of money in the opportunity and we turn around and say, actually, no, we've decided not to do this. That can still happen at the board, because the board's going to be happy with the commercial terms, but yeah, it just removes a risk for us, the way we've proposed to conduct the transaction, which is consistent with many other transactions.
Thank you.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. Having said that, there are probably instances where it would have been quite desirable for council to be a check and balance, given a transaction of this magnitude, with possibilities of issues. Is there any way that there can be some form of check and balance on the part of council? I mean, as it stands now, we may not even see those final terms and conditions.
Wayne, we did. Oh, sorry.
So
Ross?
my question is, are we even going to see the final terms and conditions before there's a sale?
Ross, are you going to answer that?
I was going to say, the answer to Councillor Walker's question depends on the resolution, any resolution the committee passes. In terms of the recommendation, the staff recommendation in front of you, the answer to that question is no. If the committee were to change that, then the answer could be different from that. But based on the recommendation in front of you, the answer is no. Eke Panuku board would sign off the final terms and conditions.
So I have a further question then, and that is there some merit in the council viewing the final terms and conditions? I don't need an answer to that question right now, but it would be useful to have it a little later. Okay. The other question I've got is that we've had the debacle over the modification of the civic building in terms of its heritage values after the sale. Is this wording, and I'm referring to the wording under C1, adequate to protect the Bledisloe building? And the context of that is that the wording that we had around the civic building was obviously inadequate to protect the heritage values. So I've got a question around C1, and that is a question that might be answered by someone in heritage.
So through the chair, the heritage team are involved in this piece of work with the corporate property team and Eke Panuku. I can't comment on what may or may not have happened before, but I can advise the committee that there has been a conservation statement developed for the Bledisloe building. It's identified what aspects could and should be retained, noting changing to building standards. The largest thing that should be retained is the exterior appearance of the building, noting that things like double glazing will have to replace the windows, so the appearance of the external building is the key heritage item here. And I say the Auckland Council heritage team are involved in this piece of work.
Councillor, I'd also alert you to point 7 in the report. Maintaining the heritage characteristics of Bledisloe will be achieved via the council's role as the regulator during the consenting process, and the involvement of council's heritage team in the development agreement process. So it's covered in the report. We're very conscious of prior decisions, and as a regulator, I think Auckland Council holds the cards there.
So my question is that, are we in a stronger position now than the previous circumstance around the civic administration building where the regulatory process enabled a change in the consent, and that involved a significant change in the facade and the heritage status of the building, or the heritage appearance of the building. So is this stronger than previously with the civic administration building?
Through the chair, I can't comment on what was or was not said in the previous report. Staff believe that we've got the protection, the control mechanism in place to protect that heritage status for Bledisloe.
So through the chair, it's Rod Aitken, Head of Corporate Property. Perhaps I can just add a further statement there. Is that appropriate?
Sure.
Yes, Rod.
Yeah, so just through the chair, that statement in 7 is obviously a summary, and it's a summary of lessons learned through that previous process. And the key point there to note, which could reflect in the recommendation, but I can give you assurance that will happen, is that the heritage team will ride alongside us and Panuku in the development agreement process. And that's designed to provide extra confidence that the development agreement with, whether that's with the current overstation developer or other, will include aspects of heritage protection that the heritage team are comfortable with in the development agreement. And the design of that is a lessons learned piece after the CAB building, and it's designed to improve the process to make sure the heritage team are fully engaged in the development agreement, which will be binding. Does that sort of answer the question and provide additional confidence?
That's great, Rod. Thank you.
Okay, and the last question I've got is around the location of civil defence in the building and the suggested cost of around $10 million for relocating civil defence. Given that civil defence is not something to play with lightly, it needs to have and should have permanence. Has there been consideration to keeping civil defence in the Bledisloe building? I have raised this issue before, and the context around that is we've already shifted civil defence from the civic administration building some years ago at significant expense to Bledisloe. I don't know where it's going to go to from Bledisloe. That's not covered off in this item. We shouldn't have the civil defence facility bouncing around like a rubber ball over time at significant cost when this particular location strategically may actually be an excellent location for civil defence. So my question is around, have we considered retaining civil defence in the basement of this building?
Look,
So through the chair, can I'll get Rod to provide the detail on this item, but yes, I mean the council's objectives is to provide a very important part of our role, civil defence, with the appropriate space to operate out of, and to have continuity spaces so we're not relying on one location. But work that has been done has identified actually, there is greater effectiveness can be deemed from more appropriate location. But Rod will give a wee bit more colour to that answer if you can, please.
Yeah, so Rod here through the chair. Look, 100% all aspects that relate to Auckland Emergency Management as requirements, if you like, a user-centred approach has been taken around this. And so what we're doing is taking a best practice first, principles approach around what are their requirements, building that up, and making sure that those requirements drive their future outcome. And the key piece for us is to make sure that we get Auckland Emergency Management in the best location that suits their long-term requirements, to your point, Councillor Walker. So yes, I can confirm that all those things are being considered, and that will come out through the briefing process. and we're very much working with Auckland Emergency Management and the governance team to make sure that a long-term fit-for-purpose solution comes out from any potential change in location.
So my question around that, given that you've got the Deputy Chair of Council Civil Defence Committee here, that's me, you've also got Sharon Stewart on the line. We haven't had any report to that committee around relocation. So we're completely in the dark from a civil defence perspective. So my question is around what oversight there is going to be of the Civil Defence Committee, for example, and other parts of council. And it goes to the previous question I raised about any council oversight.
Ross?
Yeah, so are you going, Rod? Okay, sorry.
Through the chair, so GM Auckland Emergency Management and Phil Wilson, Director of the governance team, will be your conduits in there. We'll certainly feed that information to them, and I'm sure the appropriate process will be followed in terms of reporting into the committees as appropriate. Would be my understanding.
Yeah. And also, I'd just like to add there, if I may, Chair, there is a factor of time frame. So we're not suggesting that civil defence move out of there immediately. There is a lead time, for the next 2 to 3 years to find the right location. And as Rod said, work through actually, the key requirements and making sure the requirements are met.
Okay, I think the context of my question goes like this. If we assume that this is one of the most strategic transport locations, if not the most strategic transport location in New Zealand, certainly in Auckland, that there will be significant strengthening attached to any development and so on in the area, that it's reasonably elevated. Quite obviously, it's attached to a very recent structure, which is the CRL, which I assume will have the highest standard in terms of civil defence and earthquake and other related issues. Have those things been taken into account in terms of the long-term location of civil defence at this location?
Yes, through the chair, we're developing a detailed brief around user requirements and building requirements as it relates to Auckland Emergency Management. So, for example, earthquake strengthening requirements, floodplain requirements, transport access, which relates more to vehicle access in terms of the requirements rather than train transport, vehicle access to motorway links. So, yes, a number of requirements also around building services and building condition.
So
Wayne, can I just hold you there? You've had quite a number of questions and I've got a long list. Can I maybe come back to you if you have anything?
Sure, that's fine. That's fine. If other people are interested in these questions, that's fine. But that's enough for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ross and Rod. I might speak briefly to this later on when we go to the debate, Chair. Just a succinct question to you, either Ross or Rod. A 125-year lease has been previously signed off from the governing body. When we get into the detail of the terms, is that likely to be a lease period which is paid in advance or paid over the period? Are we leaving that to Eke Panuku, or is that something that the Auckland Council finance team would be very much abreast of?
Yes,
I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So thank you. So through the chair, the first thing is in the proposed approach with MRCB is to align the lease that's been put in place for over the ATA station. So we have, the objective is to get aligned lease terms. The lease term for the over ATA station is about prepayment, payment upfront for that for the 125 years, and that would be the suggested approach here. And the cash proceeds as received would then contribute to the budgets that we've put in for cash received from asset recycling. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Okay, am I coming through okay?
Yes, you are, John, no problem.
Right. Yeah, so a couple of questions on the financials here, if you don't mind. The first one is what's the public registered CV of the Bledisloe building as it stands? That's publicly available. What is that figure?
Ross, do you have that?
Through the chair, I don't have it directly in front of me. I apologise.
Okay, so Madam Chair, could someone obtain that figure, please? It's a little hard jumping around the computer, but that's publicly available. In terms of financial investment in the Bledisloe in recent years, say since around about 2014. How much money has been poured into the Bledisloe in terms of refits, and what income have we got from other departments using other entities other than Auckland Council using the Bledisloe?
Rod, can you assist with that, please?
Councillor, I might, just before they answer, I might just say, to be fair to the staff here, we've already agreed to transfer the ownership and a change in use. So what this item is actually really about is the lease details. That information probably was available for when we made the decision last time.
Well, I think in terms of due diligence, which Councillor Walker was alluding to, I think it would just be useful to get some overall sense of how the financials stack up in this in respect of what we're proposing today. That's all I'm asking. So my understanding is that since that time there's been a $26 million refit, there's been over $5 million in rent. We know that there was $6 million put into the Bledisloe Lane refit, and by all accounts in the report, it's going to be $10 million to rehouse the civil defence. So I guess I'm just wondering, is that level of investment going to be recouped by this long-term lease?
Rod?
Yeah, through the chair. So look, our focus has been the renewals program, and the refit program has spent money on maintaining the building to a level of utilisation, and the focus that we've had is around the lack of a requirement from Auckland Council's purpose and the investment required to maintain, and the investment burden that it is for Auckland Council and ratepayers to maintain the building over the next 10 years. And I just concur with the Chair's statement that this has been discussed at length in our previous meetings around those aspects. So in relation to recouping costs, you never maintain a building to necessarily recoup costs. You maintain a building so it's fit for purpose, so you can get a reasonable sale price, which is what we've endeavoured to do. But the focus of the report, which I don't want to necessarily relitigate now, has been about the cost burden and the lack of required need for Auckland Council use, and also the fact that it doesn't serve Auckland emergency management purposes, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Yes.
so in terms of that that sale price that was referred to then, and this is something that has changed a little bit since the last time we visited this matter. There is quite a surplus of property available in the central city at the moment. It's kind of well traversed territory in terms of the challenges for businesses. So my question to Rod is, do you think this is an optimum time for proceeding with this proposal as it appears before us today in terms of the wider issues to do with property sales and utilisation in the CBD at the moment?
Yeah, look, my advice to you is this: absolutely yes, on balance. It is an optimum time. We've got a good opportunity here to achieve integrated placemaking outcomes, to achieve good value in relation to the stage that the RTS station is and the overstation development now away in the development agreement. So I think it's a great time to act on this, would be my advice on balance. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
One final question that goes to the concerns raised about the housing of the civil defence. As I understand it, the Bledisloe has an IR4 rating. Could someone explain what that means in terms of, I guess, its appropriateness for housing civil defence? What does IR4 rating mean in terms of building strength?
Yeah, look, it's through the chair, Councillor Watson. It's very technical. It's actually IL4, importance level 4, and your basic corporate building, I think, is IL2, and IL4 is a higher level. Now, I believe that Bledisloe House is not IL4, but is at over 100% of IL2. Now, IL4 as a requirement for Auckland Emergency Management is still a bit murky, and we're certainly digging into that. But the key kickers, if you like, for want of a better word, for Auckland Emergency requiring to move, it's not necessarily around its IL, its importance level rating. Yes, we will look in the market for that, but it's around things like the condition of the building services, access to and from the site during a long-term construction period, and also it's not a sprinklered building. So there's a number of factors that come into consideration for a new building, and very strongly Auckland Emergency Management do not consider it's fit for purpose. And the IL4 versus IL2 is a little bit of a red herring, but we need to dig into that into a little more, as we don't believe it's a firm requirement. And I believe that Bledisloe House is not at IL4 level as it currently stands, although I'd have to look into that further and get some more engineering support for that statement, if that's being clear and transparent for you, Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Rod, because that's quite contradictory to the information I was given in a tour of the Bledisloe building by Panuku personnel, who said it was an LO4 building, which meant it can withstand a 500-year event, and amongst other things, which meant that civil defence, for instance, couldn't go to Albert Street because it doesn't have that rating. So I think definitely there needs to be actually confirmation of what is correct here, whether it's you or whether it's Panuku who's dealing with this transaction, and also the specifics of this rating that goes to the location of the civil defence, which in this instance we're told had to be an LO4 rating, which currently exists at Bledisloe. So some clarification of the right story there would be appreciated, I think.
Yeah, there's through the chair, there's two separate items here. There's the status of the building and its reasons that it's not fit for purpose for Auckland Emergency Management, and there's council shaping up a future home for Auckland Emergency Management. That's got nothing to do with Panuku. Panuku will take the building to market. They're interested in the condition of the building for sure. Auckland Council is working alongside Panuku on the building and the proposed divestment. We are very much, Auckland Council own the relocation of Auckland Emergency Management. So in terms of its core requirements, we're working with Auckland Emergency Management, who will spell out very clearly what their requirements are, whether that is in fact IL4 or close to is good enough. So we're going to work on that as a requirement piece for Auckland Emergency Management, separate from the divestment of Bledisloe House, which is not fit for purpose for various reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Walker, I'm going to remind you to put your video on when you're speaking, please.
So I reserve the right to speak to this, Madam Chair,
Yes.
at the appropriate time.
Absolutely, no problem. Question now from Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I appreciate this is an open session and we can't divulge commercially and shouldn't divulge commercially sensitive information. But I just want to first make the point that we've made this decision anyway and we've had all the information. We did that back at the time we were doing the long-term plan. It's clear from the evidence we got that we should lease this building and not retain it. But my question actually goes to point 10, which is that the value of the commercial opportunity will be determined by obtaining independent valuations and leveraging the market knowledge gained during the competitive process for the overstation development. I know that MRCB is the obvious partner, and that's who we'd be looking for because they're doing the overstation development. But I just want some reassurance that our officers are totally confident that we can gain the true market value for Bledisloe without a further competitive tender.
Through the chair, yes, that is certainly our intention, and you know, speaking with Eke Panuku and their dealings with MRCB, they believe that the overstation development ended in a fair place commercially, and we see no reason why the Bledisloe opportunity can't have the same outcome.
All right, Your Worship.
Yeah, and just to confirm that if we were to hold on to Bledisloe, which we've decided not to, we have significant costs in terms of required building renewal that we would have to invest in it. Can you confirm that, please?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. And in current day dollars, there's about $66 million of renewals required for the building, whereas in the presentation that Rod took you through in November last year, those costs have not been provided for in the long-term plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Coombe.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. Just in terms of, I appreciate that this is the end of the process and we already approved it going through as a leasehold arrangement, which I think is good, and we're going to learn the lessons from the sale of the Civic Administration building. So just supportive of this, where we're landing. I just had I think this has already been kind of covered a bit in the previous questions, but just wanted to clarify around moving civil defence in paragraph 35, where it states that up to 10 million will be needed for that relocation. Is that kind of considered to be the upper range? And I'd be hoping that we'd be realising a lot more from the lease payment the lease payment that will come from this arrangement. Can I just understand a bit more what we're sort of seeing as the costs for that relocation?
Yeah, so through the chair, Rod will come in and just give you more detail, but that amount of money is for two purposes: the relocation of Auckland Emergency Management, and then also work that is required at Auckland House, given that we've actually, we no longer have staff in Bledisloe, so actually, accommodating more staff in Auckland House needs some more work done there. But Rod, do you want to talk about through the custom elements with Auckland House?
Yeah, through the chair. Thanks, Ross. So, yes, we believe this is the upper estimate. A little bit will be determined around the requirements for Auckland Emergency Management in terms of space and size of fit out. In terms of Auckland House, if you can imagine, Getting all of our staff into Auckland House has required some more enabling works there. So, for example, the meeting rooms, your meeting rooms in your governance areas and also on level 14 are being now heavily used, and we need to update those with Microsoft Teams kit, which was not contemplated. So there's a number of works that we need to do in Auckland House to bring it up to scratch to support more staff, and finance are across these numbers in principle at high level and have made provision, and we do anticipate that the disposal will realise significantly more than what is being allowed for through finance budgets, if that's okay, through the chair.
Thank you. And just to confirm, I support what's recommended, Madam Chair, and don't need to speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have any further questions? Well, with no further questions, I'll move into comments. And I have a comment. I should actually move it. I will move it. Councillor Darby, do you wish to second it?
Can do. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll now ask you, Councillor Darby, for comment.
Thanks, Chair. Look, yes, we did, as the Mayor reminded us, we basically made the big move some time ago. That's initially when we were discussing this, we were talking about disposal by way of sale. It's traditional to dispose of something by way of sale. And at that time, I pointed out, well, you can dispose by using other instruments by way of lease. And I'm delighted that the staff have investigated that and landed that. Because I think this strategic asset, right alongside New Zealand's soon-to-be busiest railway station, is going to have immense value in the future. And a building like this has a very long future. So it's a key strategic location, but it's also got to be integrated more fully with the Aotea Station oversight development. And there will be some changes to this building to improve the permeability through the building to the station, but we'll get a lot of benefits coming back and the enlivening of Aotea Square, etc. But look, I do want to dwell on where this contract needs to be written very differently to the contract that we wrote on the Civic Administration building, because I am really perturbed, I'm actually quite angry at the outcome that is being seen with the Civic Administration building, because the heritage values of that Tibor donor design building have been so severely compromised by the regulatory process, that the expected strategic outcomes that we thought we were going to get there have in large not been achieved. That, really unique aluminium fenestration of Tibor Donor, the architect, very distinctive and integral to the architecture of Donor, has been lost. And I can't help but look at that building now and think of the chase developments of, the mid-80s that I was familiar with in Auckland. So that has, or maybe had, a category A rating. 1950 standout architecture, our first high-rise in Auckland. Nothing like it in New Zealand then, but it just doesn't resemble the building that I've grown up with at all now. And that change has been achieved, so to speak, through the regulatory process, despite our very clearly articulated strategic outcomes that we discussed at great length. So now I'm encouraged to hear Ross and Rod say they've learned from that, but I want to make sure in these closing stages of negotiations that we leave no holes for opportunity using the regulatory process to basically erode the values of the cab, or the Bledisloe, I should say, like the cab. Noting, though, that the Bledisloe is a Category B building, I don't want to see that category B become a C or something less, like the civic administration building, is really no longer a category A. It's more like a category B. So message to our staff in Ike Panuku is to bolt this one right down. I know there will be some changes to this building, the Bledisloe, there needs to be to ensure it's integrated, but I do not want to see a developer in years to come drive a bulldozer through the contract that we had, as I see we've had that contract so severely compromised on the civic administration building. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Good comments. Councillor Watson, did you have a comment? Councillor, you noted in your questions that you wanted to comment.
Through you, Madam Chair.
I was talking to Councillor Watson.
Well, having said that, there is an amendment that I have emailed through to Sandra, and I need to be able to move that, and Councillor Watson needs to be able to second it. We're the movers and seconders. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention before anyone speaks, because I wouldn't want to jeopardise standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. May we see the amendment, please?
I have emailed it through, and you now have it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to speak to that amendment as and when you'd like me to.
All right, we'll take the amendment now. Please speak to the amendment, which is that 4? Do you mean E4? No, C4. Yes, C4. Right, Councillor?
This is not a substitution. It is in addition to the existing process. So importantly, the approval of the final terms and conditions still rest with the Eke Panuku. I'll repeat that. They still rest with the Eke Panuku board. So I'm making the assumption that the concerns that Mr. Chirnside raised around commercial negotiations and confidence and so on and so forth are still met. What this means, though, is that the Auckland Council has the opportunity to see the terms and conditions prior to the conclusion of the sale. I would have thought that that was highly desirable. I would have thought that it would help to mitigate or prevent some of the issues that we've had in other property transactions, for example, the Civic Administration Building, where there was no such oversight, and also other transactions, for example, the proposed sale of waterfront land at West Park against the Empowering Act and the coastal policy statement that could well have occurred for very little value. So as much and all as there is a party here or a CCO in the form of Eke Panuku, there are previous transactions, of which there are a number, where I would suggest it's been very desirable for Auckland Council to have some oversight, and I think that Eke Panuku would be aware of that. There can sometimes be instances where there are conflicts of interest that may not always be apparent in advance, but sometimes come to light after the event. And I would suggest that this wording also reflects the intent of the CCO review, which certainly emphasised that Auckland Council needs to have oversight over the council-controlled organisations. This is a sale or a lease sale effectively of some magnitude. It's in a highly strategic location that is the busiest transport node in New Zealand, certainly in terms of pedestrian count, and highly strategic in terms of Auckland Council's interest. So I would have thought having a very modest amendment which says that request that terms and conditions be reported back to Auckland Council prior to the sale conclusion was entirely appropriate and highly desirable. And certainly from the perspective of public interest, desirable. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We have questions on the amendment. Councillor Cooper.
The question is the intent of the amendment. Does that mean then it would come back to us and then be poked around and changed and trying to then change the terms by committee? Because if it is, that's what I want to understand from the intention of that. Because that looks innocuous, but what is the intention?
Through you, Madam Chair, would you like me to answer that? Question's been directed to me.
It has. Thank you, Councillor.
So, through you, Madam Chair, I can't second guess what the intention might be. Quite obviously, that will depend on council and what council is interested in having some oversight about. And I think, like most things, until you actually see it in the black and white, we're not going to know. It stands on its own. Request that terms and conditions be reported back to Auckland Council prior to the sale conclusion.
That doesn't answer my question, but it certainly makes my mind up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton, question on the amendment from you.
Same question, I think, probably not answered. Is the councillor suggesting it comes back to Auckland Council operational staff, or that it comes back to the governing body or the committee? I'm sorry, my camera won't work either. That's the clarification. Does he want Auckland Council operational involved here, or is he asking for it to come back to committee?
Councillor?
With your grace, Madam Chair, Auckland Council is Auckland Council sitting as Auckland Council, which is what we're doing today. So that's my...
So your definition of Auckland Council is elected members in this case, is that correct?
Yes. I mean, it may be that other parts of Auckland Council are involved. I would assume that Eki Panuku would be talking with people in civil defence and other parts of council.
No, I think you've made yourself very clear. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Right, now I have another question on your amendment from Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think the video is working, despite me activating it. Chair, look, we're not selling the building, we're leasing the building. So, Ross, it's always, Chair, I wonder if we could use the staff here to word this properly, because I think we could possibly all support this, possibly, but it's not a sale. And I'm just wondering if it's better worded, Ross, if it's prior to finalisation of lease negotiations, as we're not selling it. Chair, do you mind if we ask the staff to give us some support on this? Because it's.
I'm happy to ask the staff if they think the amendment would, what their thoughts are on the amendment.
I'm just suggesting prior to finalisation of lease negotiations, or something similar, Ross.
Yeah, so thank you, and through the chair, I mean, yeah, so thank you, Councillor Darby. Yeah, so the first point is we're not selling the building; it is a long-term lease. The second point I just like to make, if I may, Chair, is I don't know how to implement that at this point in time. You know, so, and by that I mean is we could come back and provide a report with the terms and conditions, but I don't know what we do with it, given the approval still sits with Eki Panuku board. So yeah, it's a wee bit confusing to me at the moment. I did answer earlier why we thought, or why we believe, that the resolutions as set out are the most appropriate ones.
Thank you, Ross. That's very clear. Are you okay with that, Councillor Darby?
Yes, I am. I'm in two minds on this. So thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Question on the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess it's further to the line of inquiry from Councillor Cooper and Councillor Dalton. I'm just wondering if there's anything by way of guidance, if we're considering this again, then presumably there's something that we're concerned about. So would there be an example of the sort of things we would want to look for in terms of revising the terms and conditions to be reported back? Just sort of driving at the purpose of the amendment.
Is that a question directed to me, Madam Chair?
Yes, if I can. Yeah, Councillor Walker, that'd be great.
Okay, so if we take up Councillor Darby's concern, which goes to heritage, at this point where we've got a process that's a little vague in terms of locking down our concerns around heritage. It's very clear that Iki Panuku, together with the heritage team, are going to go away and work that out. And that will obviously, I'm assuming, be reflected in terms of conditions. There are other issues that have been raised today, around value and so on, that might also merit some oversight on the part of council. One of the tests that I often put up is the worst case scenario test. What if, for example, we're selling an asset, take, say, the Civic Administration building, 60 million land, 40 million building, 100 million, and we get 3 million for it. Had we known that, we might have actually determined a different strategy. But we weren't even in any position to make any comment because we actually never saw anything. So I can't second guess, but it is very clear from the rather vague set of parameters that Iki Panuku is putting forward that there might be some opportunity and will be some refinement, and I'm suggesting that it's desirable that Auckland Council at least see that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor.
And that includes you, Councillor Henderson. And just further, Madam Chair, I'm more than happy with that suggestion on the part of Councillor Darby, that it reflect the lease, obviously, which is what we're looking at, long-term lease rather than sale. I think that a long-term lease is a form of sale, but anyway, I'm quite happy for that to be tweaked. Thank you.
Well, the amendment is yours, Councillor, so I'll leave it with you. Question on the amendment from Councillor Filipaina.
Yeah, my camera's working, so my apologies to everybody. Chair, question to the staff. With this amendment, the process around negotiation from Eke Panuku, am I right in assuming that, one, the negotiations around the long-term lease will be done by Eke Panuku, and if this amendment goes through, those negotiations then have to come back to Auckland Council? That's the first question I've got, and then maybe one or two very quick ones as a result, depending on the answer.
Who wants to take that? Ross, do you?
Yeah. Thank you for the questions. So through the chair, I think that is the intent of the amendment, but how we actually operationalize that, and at the same time, how do we make sure that any decision making aligns to actually what you've already provided for in the long-term plan?
Thank you, Ross. And just one more final question now, based on your answer. Can I confirm that Eke Panuku, and around the original discussion with the substantive or the officer's recommendations, is that all the issues that have been raised now around the heritage, around the lease, that is going to be part of the negotiation with any organisation around the long-term lease?
Through the chair, Councillor, that is correct. I mean, in bringing this item to you in November last year for inclusion into the plan, and then bringing this item again today with this decision making, I have spoken across the, to various parties. I've seen the conservation statement that Plan Heritage have prepared for I'll say the council, because it's Eke Panuku Auckland Council heritage team, and so the heritage, retaining the heritage is very much at the forefront. Rod answered earlier, just to talk about how there were some lessons being learned from previous processes, and how he believes that actually the current approach will protect those heritage values.
Kapai, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. I think the next question is Mayor Goff. Oh, no, sorry, Councillor Bartley, then Mayor Goff.
Oh, God. I'm trying to get my video to work. There we go. My question, I don't know who's going to answer it, but thank you, Chair. My question is, would this amendment actually take us into operational, which is not our role?
Thank you, Councillor. Ross?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I don't think as a staff member I can tell you what your role is or is not. So I just want to say that first. I mean, the recommendations that we put there was actually how do staff implement the decision that you made to provide for a long-term lease in the long-term plan. And we do see this as implementing a decision that you have made, and today was to outline the approach to implementing that decision. And as I mentioned earlier, council previously have established a CCO with particular expertise in this area, so with a board and management to give, to put expertise into this area. And again, that's who we're asking to implement this decision on your behalf. Hopefully that helps, Councillor.
Right, thank you. You're right, Councillor Bartley. If so, I'll go to the Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, my question is very similar to Councillor Bartley's, and I'll put it this way. The amendment as worded, it is a question, does this make elected representatives and not those with the commercial expertise the body that is actually the negotiator, if it's got to be because the inference of the amendment as currently worded is that we have to approve, or we could change it. That would make us the negotiator, wouldn't it, in a matter that would normally be delegated to those with the commercial expertise to do so?
Through the chair, yes. In a short answer, yes. I did mention earlier around actually just not quite sure as how we would deal with that and how we would practically be able to implement that. But if you take your worship, your perspective, yes. I mean, we are bringing a negotiation back midway for some form of decision making, which could be contrary to the other resolution if you pass, giving Eke Panuku that final sign off. It just seems a bit messy, if I'm honest.
Can I just add just briefly through the chair, it's Rod Aitken here, is that, look, the terms and conditions of the development agreement will be extremely detailed in many pages in detail. I'm just not sure how that then works, and I expect impacts negotiations. So it does raise a few concerns. I'm not Panuku, obviously, and Panuku are the experts here, but any development agreement that would be negotiated will be extremely detailed and at length.
Thank you. My second question, Madam Chair, I'm not sure whether it is to Ross or to Rod, but generally this really goes to the heart of what our relationship is with our CCOs. Normally what we do is we provide the governance role, we set the direction and the principles and the things that we expect the CCO to do, and then they have responsibility for the operational decisions. It seems to me that the wording of Councillor Walker's amendment, as opposed to Councillor Darby's amendment, which I could support, would take us from a governance role directly into an operational role.
Yep.
And I'm not sure we can do that without fundamentally changing our relationship with our CCOs. Really, it's probably our governance officials that would need to be able to answer that question.
Yes, and I don't know that they're here.
So in the absence of that, and I suspect it does take us from governance to into the operational details, the answer to that, I think, would be if Councillor Walker was prepared to accept Councillor Darby's wording, which says that we be notified of it, but doesn't create the impression that we are there to approve or not to approve it, which would make us the negotiators. I could support the amendment, but otherwise, in the current wording, we become the negotiators, and I don't think that's the intention of the way our council is set up or its constitution.
So, Your Worship, Councillor Walker has accepted. Have I read you correctly, Councillor Walker? You have accepted the slight change as per Councillor Darby.
That is correct.
Okay, well then that's.
Can you just hold the line, everybody, and we'll just.
Yeah, that clarifies my concern. I can support the change in the wording that we're notified of it, rather than the implication that we approve or not approve it.
Right. So, if I'm not mistaken, the amendment on the screen now is the amended amendment. Request that terms and conditions be notified back to Auckland Council prior to the finalisation of lease negotiations. And that has been accepted. Councillor Walker, is that correct?
Yes.
Councillor Watson? Councillor Watson?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. We have another, I'm just losing my place now, another question from Councillor Fletcher, I think.
I think Councillor Fletcher can go
Thank
first,
you.
but mine is not coming up, obviously. Thank you.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, would you have me ask my question to Councillor Walker now?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry about my dog in the background. I'm just trying to understand the purpose of this amendment, and I now appreciate that there is a willingness to accept the wording, and it's put on screen. But what I'm really trying to understand, Wayne, is this about accountability? There's been considerable remorse expressed over the Civic Administration building, where, in a governance sense, it was delegated to the CCOs, and the execution of that has meant that the heritage has been lost, and I'm perhaps some foreshadowed that might happen. However, is it your intention with this amendment to bring that clarity around the accountability which we carry as elected members? Could you just speak to that briefly, please?
Through you, Madam Chair.
Councillor?
I think at the very least, this amendment offers some minimal oversight over the council-controlled organisation. Without question, they're going to be involved in finalisation, but at least there is an opportunity for us to see what is being put up. I would hope that they do this in good time, that is, somewhat in advance of the lease negotiations being concluded. And I would have thought that any potential purchaser of the lease would have actually been even more comfortable if they knew that the final negotiation had actually had the purvey of Auckland Council. I would have thought that that would have given them even more satisfaction. But coming back to your question around accountability, yes, there is an element of accountability here. It's fairly minimal, but I think the principle is there, because if we look at that history of the civic administration building, I'm quite certain that we would have done that contract differently if we were doing it now, and there might have been quite a different outcome. That's too late, but I don't think we want to repeat that mistake again. Have I answered your question, Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, you have. Thank you for that. I mean, ultimately, as elected members, we have to be accountable, and the governance structure, as the Mayor has touched on, it is important that we know our role in this, and if we've given authority to the CCO, then they should be able to execute it. But as we saw with civic administration, perhaps some of the aspects to that were not held true in a regulatory sense, and we live with the consequences now, and ultimately the accountability for that falls on us.
Thank you, Councillor. So I have 3 more questions on the amendment. Councillor Hills, Councillor Collins and Councillor Coombe. Councillor Hills, you first.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you. I guess maybe a question for the staff, and then if I don't get the answer, then to Councillor Walker. But from the staff, considering we've unanimously supported this, the amendment seems even more messy, and I know staff are trying not to be political, but I just want to understand what they believe notifying us prior to negotiations, how that would be notified. How would staff notify us of this? And I'm assuming wanting no feedback or decision changed. I just want to know how this plays out and how staff would see that play out, because even now it's changed from a report to notified. I'm not sure what that... So how would staff still respond to this? Could I have an answer there? And then I might have to ask Councillor Walker the intent again.
Yeah, so through the chair, so if Councillor Hills had asked me that question prior to Councillor Walker last speaking, I would have a different answer. But reading that to me, that resolution to me is that prior to conclusion, we would provide the elected members with a memorandum, a confidential memorandum setting out the key aspects of the long-term lease, and various other elements that have been worked through negotiation. In the last statement that Councillor Walker made, he did talk about it being something being provided within sufficient time. And started to go, well, actually, what will you then do with that if you've given the approval to Eki Panuku? There's a thing around inform, and then there's a thing around decision making.
Yes, and considering decisions and discussion when they were confidential about Bledisloe were leaked out during, would you say there was a concern to notify or send out confidential commercial agreements, including, I assume, budgets and money, with a long time before negotiations is not a sensible thing to do?
Through the chair, any notification to elected members would have to be at a stage where we believe that one, the deal has been done and all the significant aspects of that deal have been agreed between the parties, so that you don't actually then get a pseudo secondary negotiation going on, and so that you also maintain the confidence of assuming it's MRCB and they take up the first opportunity, so you maintain their confidence in that process.
And thank you, Ross. And if this amendment didn't go forward, you would be providing as much detail as possible after the negotiation was complete anyway, right? So that's information.
Through the chair, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose there's 2 elements to that, Councillor. One is actually, I said earlier, part of the overall asset recycling, so you get updates on that, and we would be updating you on how these things are progressing across a whole suite of opportunities. And then secondly, you've obviously got the CCO Oversight Committee, where Eki Panuku come and talk to you on their work programme once a quarter, and you may wish to ask them specific questions on this opportunity at that time.
Okay, and thank you, Ross. And very quick answer from you, Councillor Walker, as the mover. Your comments around as early as possible so we can have discussion and decision, is your purpose that if you didn't like the agreement, you'd then want to change it, the terms and conditions, or alter them in some way? And so then we would...
Point of order, Madam Chair.
It's a question of...
No, hold on. The point of order has been called. I will ask for the person who called that to confirm what that is. Councillor Watson?
So it's Councillor Watson here. I think in the last meeting in the Planning Committee, we had it established that such questions of this, I've never been in a council meeting where we have this cross-examination of someone who's moved an amendment. I don't think that's in keeping with standing orders. I'd appreciate a clarification on that. I know there's been a ruling in the past that it hasn't been. If it is now the new de facto policy where amendment mover can be subject to a whole series of questions and commentary, then I'd be interested to know if that's the situation going forward. Thank you.
Look, I'll ask Sandra, but I think what Councillor Hills was trying to do is just actually really understand the intent of the mover of the amendment. It wasn't disrespectful. I think it was just asking for clarification. But Sandra, could you confirm for me, please?
Thank you, Chair Simpson. The questions being raised are for the members of the committee. Staff shouldn't really be providing advice, but I believe it is for clarification. The questions just in terms of the intent of the amendment. Thank you.
I'm happy just to speak to the amendment then, Madam Chair. Don't worry about the question. Thank you.
All right, we'll leave you then, Councillor Hills. I'll move to Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think my question has been asked in... Oh, sorry about the video. My question has been asked, and it was probably asked with the polite sentiment that was given through Councillor Fletcher's question, because that's something I wanted to understand. And I've noted already that I'm warm to the adjusted amendment that was initially put up by... Sorry, that was seconded by Councillor Darby. So I'm cool at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Coombe, last question, I think, from you on the amendment.
Oh, thank you. And I'll try and frame this as a question because I'm just picking up on what Rod Aiken said around that a lease has got, many, many pages, the negotiation. So that amendment doesn't actually say that it would be just the key points. So my question really is if there's concerns about what we think, what the requirements are that we want to be met, I would thought that we add that, should be added to C if there's any other requirements that we want to make sure are met through those negotiations, because as drafted, the current amendment is really just saying we want to see a full lease agreement, all the terms, so that we can kind of then nitpick it and go through it. So yeah, I guess my question still is that it's not clear on the intent of it and why we would have this step added because it's out of sequence to, if there are issues that we want to ensure are met, then we should get those out clearly now under C. Having a 40-page lease agreement is not going to help us.
Through you, Madam Chair, may I respond?
You can.
I would suggest that we're massively overthinking this. We've got a number of recommendations that are actually quite vague already. It follows because of the way that the governing body generally conducts itself that we don't generally get into the detail on almost anything. And I'm not suggesting that we are. Quite obviously, the officers are going to be reporting back to us. Quite clearly, there will be issues around confidentiality and the like that they will be concerned with, and we would be concerned with. So this very much leaves it to the officers to report back to us with some information that's relevant to Auckland Council. I really think that there's some merit in leaving the particular words here so that they're not dealing with the minutiae of the thing. That's not our role. Our role is to give a lead to the officers for them to carry something out. And frankly, all we're saying here is that we're interested in seeing something before it's finalised. And quite obviously, they're going to present to us the material that's going to be relevant to us. And
yes, Councillor, I think we've got that. So I really appreciate what you've done.
We would not be doing this with everything else.
Right.
Otherwise our meetings would go on for days. So again, I come back to my point. We're overthinking this. We're actually looking to pick holes when the intent, I think, is fairly clear.
I think we've got that. Thank you, Councillor. So I will now move. If I've got so many comments, I'm just trying to keep up. Sandra, you're going to have to help me. I think we're going to head into comments.
Chair.
Comments, and I have comments from Councillors Dalton, Cashmore, Bartley, Cooper, Watson. In that order, please.
Councillor Bartley has removed herself from that list, Chair.
Oh, thank you. All right, we'll start with Councillor Dalton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to try and start my video again. It was working yesterday, but it's not going to. All right. I'm not supporting the amendment. There's just a couple of things. One isn't the reason, but the reference to Auckland Council, in my mind, is not defined enough, because the intention of this amendment by Councillors Walker, Watson and Darby is for the terms and conditions to come back to elected members, notified too. The Act does call us the governing body. I think we need to be really clear. I mean, I could interpret this particular amendment as it being notified back to Auckland Council. For me, that's notifying it back to Auckland Council. It should be specific around the governing body. I'm not asking for a change to that. I'm just making that point. If the governing body lacks the confidence it needs to have in the Eke Panuku board to sign off on a lease agreement, then the governing body needs to sit down and have a discussion about its expectations of the Eke Panuku board. This conversation has been very long and it didn't actually need to happen, in my view. We need to get this governance right. And our issues are with the Eke Panuku board signing off on something that it looks like we want to go back and have another look at to make sure it's correct. I don't believe that's our role. Our role is to make sure that every CCO board that we have are really clear on our expectations, whether that's around heritage or whether that's around sales. So look, it just becomes clearer to me with just about every meeting we have, the challenge there is for some of us between the line of governance, regional governance, and operational matters. So I won't be supporting this amendment today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is my coming through all right, hearing?
Yes, you are, Councillor.
Okay, I won't turn on my video if you don't mind, please. It's just sort of like the pigeons are tentative out here. And I imagine turn the video on, they'll start falling out of the sky and I'll lose connectivity. So my points are fairly simple. The key findings and the principal finding of the CCO review panel was that the CCOs was the correct model to deliver the high percentage of the things they deliver on our behalf to the people of Auckland. We appoint the board members, now professional board members, with the chair of Paul Majuri. And we have a professional, and that board appoints the ELT and staff and CE of their organisation, being David Rankin. This sort of amendment is actually part of the reasons why we had these troubles in the first place. It is stating a lack of confidence, or intimating a bit of lack of confidence in the CCO pertaining to do this work. The CCOs report back quarterly to the Oversight Committee. That is the place for this work to be done. And my last point is to do with the partnering up with the potential developer being MRCB. If you're on their shoes and you thought this has to go through a second stage process back to politicians, that would smack of risk and doubt to that person, I imagine. And that would mean risk, and that would mean expense, and that would mean diminished returns to us. So I'm saying what's intended here is absolutely just a meddle in the processes of management when we are in fact governors. Councillor Dalton was absolutely correct. There needs to be a stronger line of regional governance and not meddling in the processes which we have appointed people in the rightly proposed way to do so. Sorry I'm a bit strong in it, but this is just wrong.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I mean, for me, oh, sorry, have I started the video? Yes. All of those things that Councillor Dalton and Councillor Cashmore have said have been on my list to say. So I won't say those. I wholeheartedly agree with them. This is about trust, and we must trust our CCOs. Otherwise, our whole system falls apart. Also, the other issue around negotiation, people in the other party, the group negotiating this lease, have the right to have trust in the fact that they're negotiating with one group. Because if they can't have faith in that negotiation, then it will be flawed, and it isn't a fair process. For me, that's why I first said, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, that I set off this round of asking questions. But that was what I saw behind the intent. There's no point in seeing this unless you can do something about it. So to me, that shows that this amendment is about fiddling with it. And we don't have a role in fiddling with the amendment. So I cannot support this. We need to let Eke Panuku do their job as we direct them to with our statements of intent, and our letters of expectation. So I can't support this, Madam Chair. And I think if this is supported, it sets a very dangerous precedent right across all of our CCO work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm having trouble with my video too. I'd like to thank Councillor Walker for putting this amendment up. One of the key findings, if not the key finding of the CCO review, was that Auckland Council, i.e. the governing body, should exercise some more oversight of the CCOs. And that wasn't actually meant as a criticism of the CCOs. It was actually meant as a commentary on the lack of oversight and supervision that the council has exerted in the 10 years the Super City's been in existence. So not the CCO, us. And in this case, I'm kind of prompted to recall the words of Winston Churchill, who made a lot of quotes about history, but one of them was that the one lesson of history is that humans don't learn from history, and that's what I see exactly playing out here. Councillor Darby referred to the instance of the Civic Administration Building, which had heritage features too. It was a Category A. This is a Category B. This Civic was identified as having exceptional overall national, regional and local significance in terms of its historical, technological and aesthetic values. Now, that was from Salmon Reed. That was what was said during all the regulatory processes that accompanied the terms and agreement, or came from the terms and agreement of the development agreement. And look what we've got today. You know, we've got an outcome that bears no resemblance to the heritage values that were said were going to be protected. We've been told here today that that we've learnt from this, and that we'll have we can have faith in the regulatory process and the heritage team working together. That's not what happened in the last time. The regulatory side of council, the planning side, was saying one thing. They supported the changes, and were in fact quite dismissive of the east and west facades as their importance to the overall heritage preservation. Our heritage team, to their credit, they opposed them, and made the commentary that the loss of the original building material would be mitigated by a faithful reconstruction of the original faces. Now, that didn't happen. We were sitting on the sideline being reassured, and there was endless questions as to the heritage preservation at that time, and that just didn't amount to anything. In this instance, we've got an opportunity to learn from that disastrous heritage outcome for the people of Auckland, never mind the financial outcome. Someone referred to meddling in the roles of the CCOs. The CCOs actually appreciate direction at times, and I would suggest this is one of those times. We've just seen the conclusion of a prepaid lease at Gulf Harbour Marina, where the financial outcome without selling the marina is the same as the outcome that was being proposed with selling the marina. That was due to meddling and direction from council. So we have a situation there where the marina has not been sold. We have the same outcomes in terms of community good and the same financial outcome. That was council meddling that did that, not just leaving it to the CCO. So I would suggest, Madam Chair, that this very, very mild amendment is the least that this council can do, the members sitting around this table, a large number of whom I might add, who voted for the sale of the Civic and the consequential assurances in terms of both price and heritage protection. This is the very least people can do in terms of following through on the nearly $1 million we paid for the CCO review, and actually bolstering our CCO. Not just leaving it to them and then complaining afterwards and leaving them to cop the bad publicity, but to actually having a part in that. And in this case, it amounts to just having a look at the finalisation of the lease negotiations. That's hardly interference of a major magnitude. So I would just say in winding up that my concern doesn't just go to the heritage outcomes, which have been so evidently remiss in the Civic, but also actually to the financial outcomes too. Because when I look at the CV, 48 million, that's publicly available. When I look at the considerable investment in terms of the $26 million refit, the $10 million for the relocation of the civil defence, the loss of income with rental, etc., etc., I see a rather delicately balanced financial situation here that I want to exercise at least some awareness of, so I don't end up getting ambushed with, a $3 million sale and a $100,000 deposit and a 20-storey building that bears no relation to how it was before. I'd like to avoid that outcome this time, Madam Chair, and this amendment is probably the mildest means of at least seeking to do something along the way to ensure that happens.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Off the bat, I will not be supporting this. When I read it, and especially the word that's in front of us underlined, which is finalisation, I can see, and this is why I asked the question around process, I can see another debate happening. I can see a leak to the media in regards to some of the conditions before it actually is negotiated. I would rather, and I would rather include in there, if it goes through, that we get notified or it comes back, the conditions come back to council after the lease has been signed. I agree with Councillor Dalton and also Councillor Cashmore and others. We're governors. we're not the ones. It was unanimous for Eke Panuku to end up finalising and negotiating the lease requirements. So look, I'm going to leave it with them. I can't see us interfering, and it is interfering in regards to this coming back to finalisation or prior to finalisation. Chair, I just want to make sure that the people who are experts do the negotiation and then sign it off. And look, after that, as we've heard, and Councillor Hills ended up asking the questions around whether it's going to come back to us. Yes, it is going to come back to us, but I'd rather get it after the experts that we've got at Panuku, they end up finalising and signing off the negotiations. So I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair. Seeking your permission to avoid the camera. I just have a fairly unreliable internet connection sometimes. But yeah, look, just as Councillor Filipina and others have said, look, I won't be supporting this either. And the reason for that briefly is I don't know why we would ask for this unless it's for the purpose of actually changing anything in the terms and conditions of the lease. To me, this is a dangerous drift from Governance Street onto Operational Lane. Staff are here for their expertise and to handle these operational issues. Our role is to give direction, and if the issue we have is giving direction, then I think there are more appropriate ways of doing that. And so, yeah, to say, look, I back the staff that we hire to use their expertise, and therefore I won't be supporting the amendment.
Thank you. I think, Mayor, you're next.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to get the camera to work. No, it's playing up on me. I'll try once again. How's that? Yep, we're working. Okay, look, I was almost persuaded to support the amendment until Councillor Walker talked me out of it. You set up a team. Look, our role is as governors. So our role is right now, we set out the instructions to our CCO about what we want as a result of the deal that is to be negotiated. We want a commercial return, a market return from the leasehold. We want the heritage protected, and there may be other things that you make as part of that. That's where our role ends. If you actually get us then to say, well, just on the edge of concluding this, bring it back to us and then we might change our mind and want you to do something different, that makes the role of the negotiators absolutely impossible. It's not our role to do that. If the focus is on heritage and it's on a market value for it, get the people who have expertise to have an input into the negotiation, but that's not the role for elected representatives. I think that, look, the CCO review did a lot of things. It never suggested that we then move from the role of governance into determining the details of a negotiating round or finalise what might be in that negotiation partway through. And I fear that if somebody was opposed to what the negotiating deal was, that they would feel very strongly tempted to go public on that, which would destroy the integrity of the negotiating process. So, look, I have considered the amendment genuinely, but I think the downside of that amendment far outweighs any benefits we could have from it. I think Councillor Walker made it quite clear that it wasn't a case of being notified, that is, told what's in it, but rather having the chance to amend at the 11th hour what is in that agreed negotiation. And you cannot do that. It does not work. It undermines the integrity of the process, and it takes us from the role of being governors to running something like Panuku operationally. And if we can do that to Panuku, why not to Watercare or Auckland Transport? I think it crosses the line and we shouldn't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Look, originally I said that I was very warm to supporting the amendment, and I've given this some thought. I wasn't going to support the original amendment, and I thought that this one had, I was warm to it because I thought it was taking it a half step. Having listened to what people have said this morning, especially the words of Councillor Dalton, who began the discussion, I'm very aware of my own role as the liaison councillor with Eke Panuku. And one of the reason why I won't now be supporting this particular amendment is because I think there is a clear line that we've got to try and work towards between governance and operations. I want to acknowledge that people who have come to me before to ask questions of Panuku have been Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson. They've been very upfront, and I've been more than happy to have conversations with Eke Panuku about the concerns that councillors do hold, and I've welcomed that honesty and that upfrontness that they've shown. And I think this is another situation where we can have conversations to rebuild, for some people, to rebuild that sense of trust in the CCO. And look, that's going to take time, but for me, I'm landing on the place where I'm in complete agreement around distinguishing the line of governance and that which is operational. And again, look, I'm the liaison councillor to Eke Panuku. I'm happy to have an offline conversation just so that they're aware, and it may mean that there's further discussions to be had, because it's important that we as governors show that we're confident in this process. We're confident in our CCO, their management structures. They have a board, and that for some of us is taking some time to get to, and I just want to acknowledge that, but I won't be supporting the amendment on this occasion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, Madam Chair. I want to speak only briefly, but I think this has been a really important discussion on our respective roles, and governance is an issue that really has always interested me. I think that where we have gone wrong in the past is, as elected members, that we haven't had sufficient clarity around our own brief of what we expect from our CCOs, and that is where I think that distrust has emerged, and that isn't in any way disrespectful of the CCO. I think it's probably a fault that we can find within ourselves. I take this amendment, however, in a sense of simply one of oversight, and I do think we need to take leadership and be accountable for that leadership from time to time. My understanding of what Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson were trying to do was not to go and renegotiate or anything of that kind, but just have the comfort in a belts and braces way that those issues, particularly in a regulatory sense pertaining to heritage, had actually been factored in. So on that basis, on that understanding, I'm quite comfortable with the amendment, and I would like to support it as such. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Just put the video on. Look, thank you. Hey, look, there's questions of trust and, our role, and I don't have any question about trust in Eke Panuku, the chair there, Paul Majuri, who I rate very highly, and the chief executive, who I rate equally highly. Look, I am reflecting on what's transpired at the Civic Administration building, and that's why I am going to support this amendment. Look, I had trust, that our so-called bulletproof agreement there that safeguarded the heritage values of the Civic Administration building would stand up. And we identified those in some ways quite prescriptively at the Planning Committee. And I've seen a memo, I requested a memo on what transpired there because it really concerned me. And it's quite a long memo and it's well outlined, and Eke Panuku contributed to that, and so did our heritage team. And what I saw is Eke Panuku did their damnedest, as did our heritage team, to ensure those strategic outcomes regarding heritage were carried over and enforced. But it was the regulatory process that actually pulled the rug on it. And so I don't have any doubt of Eke Panuku or anybody else within council, but it is on my mind, and this building is not too far away from that. And I guess that proximity just prompts me to reflect on the unfoldings at the cab. But yeah, you could say this is greater governance oversight by us at the governing body. It's not about me or others stepping into operations. It's just about us stepping up in our governance, given recent history. Look, it's just that. I do not want to see another outcome like the Civic Administration building. On my watch, it was a miserable failure, and so that's top of mind, and that's why I'll be supporting this one.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further comments? Councillor Bartley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is my video working? I just wanted to comment that I think it's quite sad that in order for us to try and get some accountability, we're going to do it this way by moving these kind of amendments towards the end of a process. I think there are other ways to get that accountability, which we all know about. I think this does take us into, it's not emphasizing or oomping up our governance role, it's belittling our governance role into operational. That's what I see. And personally, if the terms and conditions do come back to us, what am I going to do with it? I'm not an expert in this field, so I'm quite happy to leave it to Eke Panuku, who we've tasked to do this as the CCO. So I will definitely not be supporting this amendment or any other amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think with no other comments, I'm going to comment myself. Look, I've gone from not wanting to support this, to not wanting to support this, to support this as the conversation has gone. I absolutely agree with the comments of Dalton, Cashmore, Cooper, Filipina, His Worship the Mayor, etc., around the fact that this is a governance direction for Eke Panuku. But I think the reason that I'm leaning towards supporting this is that there has been a mistake made in the past. And I suppose for me, it is a check. It is a check, not a change. I'm hoping to see that everything that we have requested by way of governance direction has actually been finalised in the next negotiation. It is not our place to change. The way I read this recommendation is that we can just give a tick in our own minds that the heritage and the market value, etc., those terms are okay. It's one step. I think also my other comment I would make is my comment would be to the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Dalton in the CCO Oversight Committee, that actually as a result of this very long discussion, that actually we do look at our relationship with Eke Panuku going forward and maybe tightening up some of those some of that understanding and clarity for us in their operational decision making. What lessons have they learned as a result of the CAB situation and bringing that forward to give us more confidence. But for me, I'm hoping this is a once only clause that we ever need to do, and I'm happy to have it as a check. Now, to that end, with no further comments, it has been there has been a division called by Member Taipui, so I will take that first and ask Sandra to do it, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members are voting on division on the amendment, which is on your screen. Mayor Goff.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Against.
Councillor Bartley.
Against.
IMSB Member Blair.
Abstain.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Coombe.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
No, sorry. Thank you.
Councillor Mulholland, who's on the phone. Councillor Newman is not here yet. Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
IMSB Chair Taipari.
No.
Councillor Walker. Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Young.
Full.
Chair Simpson.
For.
That's lost.
Right, the amendment has been lost. We now go to the substantive. Please pull the substantive up. Right, I will try this on voices. All those in favour say aye.
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 Against?
No, and have that recorded for Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you.
And Councillor Stewart.
And Councillor Stewart. I take that as being passed then. Thank you.